Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Center for Spiritual Living here in Palm Desert. My name is Joe Hooper. I'm the spiritual director here. I'll be officiating today the service for Scott. We have a wonderful choir that's going to be singing with us. Chelsea's in a choir here at the center, and they're going to share some music in just a moment. But to begin the service, I'd like you to just close your eyes for just a moment, if you would, please. Take a deep breath in. And let's just know that God is in this place, surrounding us in love, surrounding us in peace. And right now we take this moment, just allow ourselves to release whatever we need to release so we can be free of fear and allow ourselves to be fully present in the celebration of life for Scott. It's a beautiful day because we celebrate someone on their way. We allow them to move into this new expression of life with our blessing, with our love, and with the support of the infinite. And so it's knowing that I just allow this experience for us today to unfold, this celebration of life, of love, and of a legacy of this beautiful man. For this truth, we are so very blessed. And as I release my word, we let it be so. And so it is. Please join me by saying amen. Amen. So today we have a memorial service, a celebration of life. And these are unique experiences because you bring many people together who have different faith traditions. And so what I always like to say at the beginning of every celebration of life is we always put our traditions aside and just join under one umbrella of love, one umbrella of peace, and one umbrella of just being a friend or a family member for Scott. And so allow yourself just to experience what we experience here at our center every Sunday, and allow yourself just to experience this man's life, because Chelsea and her family have done an amazing job of creating video of pictures and tributes. So it's going to be a blessed event. So I want to now introduce the choir, and they have asked that at the end of their song that you not clap, that we just withhold that, hold them in peace, but don't have that, because it's going to be a wonderful meditative process. So if we could turn on the lights, and ladies, please. What I know about Scott, and it's not very much because he didn't come to the church, but I know his daughter. And I know his daughter, and I know the legacy that this man has left with a lot of people. And it's evidenced by the people that are here today. I look around and I know that some of you have worked with him, some of you are family members, some of you are friends. His legacy always continues on. What we truly believe in our teaching here is that we use the word transition. Someone makes their transition. A lot of people use the word death. We use the word transition because the word transition means change. And that's what happened. Scott changed, and we change. Our relationship changes. We're not able to pick up the phone or see them in person, but I know that his feeling and his presence can be felt. I mean, when they were singing today, I've only met him a couple times because he actually put the roof on our building. Right? I mean, we're protected by him, the elements, because of the work that he and his team did. So I've only had a couple interactions with him, but what I do know is that he had an energy about him. He had an energy, and he was a man that was very driven, and a man who had also gone through a lot of different life challenges. Chelsea was able to share with me some of the challenges that she experienced, and I know that that affected him and his family. So the continuity of life is this. I think that we were born into this experience for a certain amount of time. We don't know how long that time is, and unfortunately, when you look at someone as young as he is, I think he's 57, yeah, close to my age. 58, close enough. We're in the ballpark. 58 today. Today's his birthday? All right, then today's his rebirth day. That's good. We're here to celebrate his rebirthing day. Is that okay? I like that idea. We never know when someone's going to make their transition. But what we do know is that whatever their life experiences were, they're complete in and of themselves with the universe, with God. Which means this to me. The older I get, I remember when I was a young kid, I used to think that 40 was ancient. Do you remember when you were a child and you went, oh my God, they're 40. They're like, that's close to death right there. And as we got older, that number moved, right? As we got older, then it was 50, 60, and now as I'm in my 50s, I'm like, well, okay, 95 is old, right? So we feel like someone led a full life if they've been here for so many years and so many rotations around the sun. But really, that's not true. What's true is that when someone's life experience is here, we experience a loss because they're not here with us, because we feel like we were shortchanged, like it was cut short. But the universe knows nothing of time. It only knows experience. And so his experience, while we call it short, it was full from the sunrise to the sunset. So when we feel our loss and we feel our sense of grief, it's nice to reflect back onto, and remember, you can't be grieving and grateful at the same time. Those two emotions don't coexist in one's mind. So when you go into grief, I would say this, go into gratitude. Go into gratitude. It's very easy when one is grieving to look what could have been into the future. In other words, this is what I would have experienced this had I stayed on the planet, or I'm sorry he's going to miss this or that or the other thing. But that's projecting grief into the future. I would always tell people, if you can possibly avoid projecting your grief out to what could have been and reflect on what was. Reflect on the legacy of what was and the gratitude for what was. And I'm sure it wasn't all, peaches and cream and rose gardens. I'm sure anybody's life, especially when you have kids. Anyone who knows that knows that. But I can tell you that that legacy, that strength continues. And I was looking at the back of the program. And if you look at the back of the program, it says, Remembering Scott. Scott is survived by. And there's a list of people there. And then there's a general list of friends and family, right? But there's a list of people there who are going to carry on that spirit and that soul of who he is. He may have left the physical plane, but his spiritual body continues in every single one of these people and all of you, and even more. His legacy is left. So that's what we call the continuity of life, that it doesn't end with him here. This ends one physical experience, but his spiritual presence, his energy, his family, and that legacy will always continue. Does that make sense? So instead of grieving, we could say, instead of going into grief, it's very natural to do that. Instead of going deep into it, allow yourself to turn 180 degrees and go, I'm really grateful for the time that we had, and reflect on those times. And to do that, we have a video with lots of pictures, and I can't wait to see these. This family has worked really hard at coming up with these pictures. So, William, if you would please, I can't wait to see these.
Tell me, what does it look like? Does it look like in heaven? Is it peaceful? Is it peaceful? Is it free like they say? Does the sun shine bright forever? Have your fears and your pain gone away? 'Cause here on earth it feels like everything good is missing since you left. And here on earth everything's different. There's an emptiness. Oh, I hope you're dancing in the sky, and I hope you're singing in the angels' choir, and I hope the angels know what they have. I bet it's so nice up in heaven since you arrived. So tell me, what do you do in heaven? Are your days filled with love and light? Is there music? Is there art and adventure? Tell me, are you happy? Are you more alive? 'Cause here on earth it feels like everything good is missing since you left. And here on earth everything's different. There's an emptiness. Oh, I hope you're dancing in the sky, and I hope you're singing in the angels' choir, and I hope the angels know what they have. I bet it's so nice up in heaven since you arrived. Since you arrived. So nice up in heaven since you arrived. Since you does it look like in heaven? Is it peaceful? Is it peaceful? Is it free like they say?
Let's give those girls a round of applause for putting that together. That was great. That was great. The legacy was there. You could see it. You could feel it. You could feel it. Now I'd like to welcome Rachel. Rachel? Yeah. Some of the family and friends are going to give tributes here. Just make sure you talk right into the microphone, okay?
Thank you.
Okay?
Yeah. I think you and me are pretty synchronistic on our message today. I'd like to begin by taking the initiative on behalf of the Carter family by thanking every single one of you for coming here to honor my dad's life today. We already mentioned today was his birthday, and Scott came into this world and became a part of each of our lives. Since his transition, each morning my waking thought is a melody of a song he used to sing to us as kids to get out of bed. He'd start the gift of each new day singing, "We're all in our places with bright shining faces. Good morning to you, pretty girls. Good morning to you." And while his higher singing notes were borderline torture for us, I heard an unconfirmed rumor that my Grandpa Carter may have been responsible for this song. I would give anything to hear him sing it again. And in a way, we do, by ensuring we continue to pass it down the generations. My dad was one of the greatest challengers in my life. He opened up opportunities, just like he had for so many others, to grow, to expand perceptions, to try, to voyage where most were not brave enough to, and to face the matrix. And if some of these references aren't obvious, my dad was a sci-fi nerd. And among several other characteristics he helped me craft, his favorite was how to feel. While I'm certain I'm not the only person in the room who sometimes got tripped up with his accuracy to emotions and how they connect to answers, peace, relief, and the internal truths that we had done such a great job of avoiding discovering about ourselves. Taking those deep diving conversations with him became a reliable way to navigate an emotional storm into clarity. Both brave and selfless were his acts as an open ear, a co-pilot, and a mentor. And when he wasn't sharing his own experience and wisdom gained along his journey, he was reliably there to cheer many people on as he marveled at how far they had come, and the inner workings of the universe and divine connection within ourselves. When I got the call from my sister, a new reality without my dad in the physical had begun. When the shock faded and the emotion set in, my mind raced as a defense mechanism to deal with the pain. This was usually about the time I would call my dad to help manage being overwhelmed. Once I had realized that I was no longer able to access my dad by picking up the phone, I closed my tear-filled eyes, and it was as if I could hear him as clearly as I'm speaking to you now, saying a phrase that he had guided and balanced me with so many times. "You can't think your way out of this." And it leaving me impacted with the clever alternative of facing the sensation of pesky emotions, which I later embraced after trusting the path he had forged to any solution. On the plane ride over, I began considering the concept of grief. I closed my eyes and I wrestled to suppress feeling it, remembering how he had taught me to feel my way through everything. I surrendered and sat with the grief. And as the force of the grief sat with me, it became so clear to appreciate what grief was, as I was no longer afraid of the pain and seemingly the loss. I realized that I'd become extremely grateful to have cherished a life so much that something like grief could even exist when he had to go. I want to ask all of you now to indulge me in honoring my father. Release the grief to the surface and consider gratitude to have loved Scott so tremendously and to trust your tears. When we knew his illness had returned, I got to share with my dad how I was the most scared of how much I would miss him, and I didn't want him to go. I was able to tell him that I knew how uniquely special our likeness to each other was, and the world would get a little lonelier without him. Many of you have heard his favorite response to "how you doing" with "just another day in paradise." And while I suspected why he would say this to everyone, I wanted to hear it directly from him. And he told me that because no matter what others thought his life should be, he wanted to create what his life was at every moment. Although many of us are a bag of mixed emotions over his passing, we were gifted to have experienced my father in this lifetime. I called Vicki, and she helped me lovingly to receive a gift that I will hold close to my heart for the rest of my life by placing me on speakerphone to talk to my dad, who at the time was no longer able to speak easily. I was able to tell him how much I missed his voice in our self-development talks that could go on for hours and express my love. And true to his strength and stubbornness, he somehow gathered the last words I got to hear my dad speak to me, and he said, "I love you, Ray." I'll wrap this up with a message. My dad was proud of each and every one of us, even if we aren't unconditional with ourselves. He was, because we're here and we're trying and coming together with him in this journey, not only contributed to our lives, but all of us contributed to his. I'll spend the remainder of my days carrying Scott with me, and also my descendants, in unconditional love and appreciation, and honoring his earned wisdom of seeking, allowing, being bold and brave, and his greatest knowing to give yourself and others the grace to go through life. And holding true to his brilliantly favored prayer, I will also seek the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. It is my hope that when you remember my dad, you feel inspiration from all that he was, his efforts, his focus, his intentions, his goofy humor, and his marshmallow sensitivity and care, and his love. Thank you.
Steve. Thank you, Joe. You're welcome.
Hi, my name's Steve, and Scott's my friend. There's a lot of people here who have the privilege to say he is their friend too. I've known him for a long time. Since I was in my 20s was when I first met him. I was impressed with his life skills even then when we were still doing the party thing. I remember he helped me hang some doors one time and turn an open space into a room for me. He didn't have to do that. He didn't charge me for it. He just did it for a friend. That was Scott's way. He's always been a guy who felt strongly about being of service to others. There were long periods throughout the time I have known Scott that we weren't that close. We didn't hang out all that much. But in time, I ran into him again in recovery. He was attending meetings at the ABC Club when I ended up there at the request of a judge. Yeah. We rekindled our earlier relationship, and he was the same kind of caring, solid guy he'd been all along, but now he was in recovery. I didn't stay, although he did encourage me to, but I wasn't done yet. Over the next 20 years or so, I ran into Scott occasionally, and he'd always ask how I was doing, give me one of his business cards, and tell me that when I was ready, to give him a call. Again, that was Scott's way. He had an inner peace about him that made it impossible not to like him. I mean, how can you not like somebody who always seems to have your best interests at heart? But like I said, I was out there and I'd run into him from time to time. There came a time I was at the mission down in India. I managed to stay clean and sober for about 5 months, but I was not in a recovery mindset. I got high and they kicked me out of there for breaking the rules. However, that did turn out to be the last time I got loaded. One foul swoop and I lost everything. Willard at the mission told me about a group home for vets in Desert Hot Springs, and I went there. Because of my history, they made me go to meetings, get a court card signed, and get this sponsor guy. My thinking at this point in time was that I'd jump through their hoops and start getting high again on the sly as soon as I could. As fate would have it, there was Scott again. He'd remained involved in his recovery all along. I'm not saying he had a perfect life. Nobody gets that. Even so, Scott was dealing with the issues faced in his life using the principles that he had learned in the program, and they were working. I say the principles he learned in the program, but Scott had a lot of those qualities before he got there. Nevertheless, they were the same principles. I saw it in the way that he helped a lot of other folks too. It didn't just end at the end of the meetings either. He carried those principles with him in his daily life. So when I ran into him again at those meetings, I could see for myself how he lived his life. And it was from watching him that I discovered I wanted what he had. It didn't happen the first minute that I saw him. I was still looking to run my own show. This sponsor guy was just another hoop that I had to jump through. But over time, and seeing the way that Scott had grown, and remembering him from when we were young, I asked him to sponsor me. I knew he was no saint, but in time, I had to recognize that if Scott could do it, maybe I could too. What's more, Scott was willing to help me. Now, don't get me wrong, Scott wasn't a bleeding heart do-gooder. He didn't want to waste his time on me if I wasn't serious. He showed me the big book, and he asked me to read page 58 to see if I was serious. He said that if I was, that he'd take me through these steps. I like the phrase, as iron sharpens iron. Scott helped me to forge me. He did by showing me experience, strength, and hope. I've got to admit that I kind of held him up like he was almost above being human at first. But he knew he was just a man, and he kept reminding me of it. And just a side note about being human, for anybody who's driven with Scott, he could teach Mr. Toad a thing or two about wild rides. And of course, I was able to watch him turn over some of his feelings about certain government agencies also to his higher power. And I learned from the way he did those things too. Sometimes we'd go out into the wild to work on the steps, and as he helped me work through them, he'd be playing toy with Haley, and I'd think he was paying attention to her instead of me as I was working through these steps, one or another. But then he would nail me with just the right question that drove me into soul searching. I learned about the concept of doing unto others as I wanted them to do unto me, instead of doing to them before they did to me. He taught me how to function with joy in my life. I've been to church and had a concept of what religion was all about, but Scott helped me to develop the concept of a higher power. He didn't just shove his concept down my throat. He helped me find my own. He did it without being judgmental, and he taught me it was okay to be human and to cut myself a husk. He watched as I learned, and he must have seen something in me because he was willing to put his money where his mouth was. He gave me work with his company, which was the helping hand I needed, especially at that time. This gave me the opportunity to watch him practice his principles in all his work and in all his affairs. He was fair and direct with everyone. It was his example that taught me not only how to be a better human being, but made me want to try and be that better human being. And then when he got sick, that was of course hard on all of us, but we weren't the ones going through it. It's been said that the measure of a man is how he faces death. Scott became a hero to many of us by the way he faced it. He didn't cry about it or give up and blame God. Neither did he lie down and go without a fight. He fought this thing on his own terms and faced it his way, honestly, with integrity, and straight on like the man he is. For a while, we thought he had beaten it, and everybody was pulling for him. When Vic told us at Mad Dog Days that the cancer was back, I felt that icy chill go down my spine. But Scott remained the same guy all through the illness, and I was fortunate enough to be able to spend time with him during those last days. It was 4.5 months from when he had found out that the cancer had returned to when he went. And I want to say that he went, because he went on his own terms, surrounded by friends and loved ones. And so in closing, I'd like to say, I know my friend Scott has made a huge impact on my life. And I know that he's made a huge impact on the lives of all the people that he's come in contact with. I could see it in the number of people who came to be with him at the end. He was surrounded by those that cared about him. That's the kind of friend, that's the kind of man my friend Scott is. And his memory will be a beacon for many of us who know him. Thank you.
You want to do it from right there?
You bet.
Anything?
I'll just turn around a little bit so somebody knows who I am. Good morning, everyone. I'm Scott's father. I come before you with an attitude of gratitude. For the life of my son. We know him, and you've heard of his adult life from many of you are familiar with him as well. Let me tell you a little bit about his childhood. I tried to raise each of my children to be independent, to do their own thing, to be stubborn or difficult. Most of them arrived at that. When we were stationed at Groton, Connecticut at the submarine base, we were blessed to live on a little cul-de-sac, have a nice house the military provided, and I was stationed there at the guard detachment. Scott had a fascination with a little creek behind the house. And he was in his first year of school. And I tried to explain to him, because there were some deep spots here and deep spots there, but most of it was very shallow. And I said, when I come home from work, I'll spend an hour or so out there with you. He got out of school ahead of me and would come home, and he could tell when my vehicle started into the cul-de-sac. And soaking wet, he would run into the house, put on dry clothes, and wait for me. He didn't realize that his wet footprints were still on the concrete. The first time I paddled him good, but after that, I recall that we would go out and act as though nothing had happened. And pretty soon, he became what I had asked him to do. Don't go into the creek until I get home, and I'll spend time with you. As we move forward in life, it was time for Scott. He wasn't old enough to drive a vehicle, but we had a lot up in 29 Palms. I was stationed at the Marine base there. And the lot was 300 by 100 feet. And inside of that, we had built worm farms. There was enough room by design to drive my little Datsun pickup truck. It was pretty old. But we could drive it between all the worm boxes. And so Scott learned to drive in among the worm farms. And he could take that Datsun pickup and go down to the end, turn, come back up, go between them, and take care of all the watering and all the other activities. And he gladly did it because he was able to drive the Datsun. So we wandered through that. You saw that he played some sports. Track was his main thing he liked. He did well in that. He also ran the mile relay and the mile. As he grew a little older, he worked in the wood shop. His wood shop, he was a hands guy. That's why he did what he did ultimately. He had great hands, best of my 4 children. Well, my youngest got good hands too. It's my oldest that is an athlete. And in fact, he still teaches baseball, and he's 60 years old. But anyhow, I said, Scott, would you get the swamp cooler, take the pump out, take the motor out, up on the roof? And folks here know what a swamp cooler is. Where I live in Oregon, what's a swamp cooler? But anyhow, I and said, when I get home, we'll tie the ropes to it and we'll lift it off the roof. Well, I want you to know, when I got home, the swamp cooler was on the ground. Everything was disconnected. And he was preparing to clean and recoat the inside of the swamp cooler. And I was amazed and pleased with what he had done. Later on, Scott came down and started working in the lower desert here. And he was kind of worked at different hotels and places. And I said, why aren't you taking the contractor's licensing? He said, I'm not sure I can do well with that. And I said, there's a course. You take that course, and when you finish that course, go take your license test. And the testing, if you're familiar with that, when you get to the passing score, you're done. They don't take you don't take all 100 questions or whatever it is. You just take the number of questions you have to pass the test. Well, he got in there, and the next thing he knew, he was done and it passed. And he was really pleased with that. And so he started working for himself, using a car to work and do things. And so we took that Datsun pickup truck that he was so familiar with, and we brought it down to Indio and gave it to him. It wasn't worth that much, but he was worth a lot to a guy who's doing construction or doing repairs and so forth. And so he continued then on into what became a lot of repairs and maintenance and refurbishing people's houses to the business he has today. And so I knew him, and Pat is my second wife, and she and I had the privilege of meeting him for lunch. He seemed a little concerned about that, but he came to visit for an hour, and 3 hours later, he left and went back to India. That was up in 29 Palms. I knew Scott as a person who did what he felt was right and what he needed to do. He was always in a position of choosing to what he wanted to do and how he wanted to do it. And he lived a life that was fruitful, that was productive, where he helped other people. And that's what he'll be most remembered for. So God bless you all, and thank you for attending.
Thank you. Who's reading the poem? Sure, you come on up. You're welcome. Got it?
Hello. I'm going to read a poem by my beautiful sister, Chelsea, she wrote, and it's called If I Knew Where You Were Headed. If I knew where you were headed, you wouldn't be sad. If I knew where I'm headed, I swear you'd be glad. If I knew where I'm headed, you'd have nothing to fear. If I knew where I'm headed, you see it so clear. With this understanding, now you're headed there too. Always remember, I'm waiting for you. Once you know where you're headed, you'll waste time no more. Through love, faith, and peace, you'll open the door. Have your ways to remember me, a wolf in the night, a bird in the tree. I'm eternally grateful for your prayers, near and far. I'm so blessed with previous loved ones. You know who you are. Loved you so much, but now I must go. I'll see you soon. When you get there, you'll know. Thank you.
Beautiful tributes. I'm going to have you close your eyes for just a moment. We'll bring the house lights down for just a second. Why don't you take a deep breath in and sigh on the exhale. Like there's a relief, there's a release that goes on here. Let's take another deep breath in and exhale out. What a beautiful man. What a beautiful energy. What a beautiful spirit that continues to move and have its being by means of each one of us. When someone makes their transition, no matter how much time you've had to prepare for it mentally, we always want to commune with them and say one last thing that we wish we could have said. So let's just take a moment, because I know his presence is here, and just say what you'd like to say to your friend, to your father, to your coworker, your supporter, your mentor. Just take a moment to have a conversation with him and express your gratitude. And now imagine, if you would, that you're sitting at a dock. And there's a sailboat down there. And it's an opportunity for you to have your final say with him in this earthly experience. To put your arms around him and say thank you. To give him a hug and say, Godspeed on your way. So just imagine, if you would please, in your mind, all of us on the shore waiting and saying this to him, and then allowing him to get into a sailboat. A boat that you and I will eventually be on ourselves. But imagine him just setting foot on that sailboat and moving into the ocean and setting sail across the water. And as we all sit on the shore, and we say to ourselves, there he goes. As soon as he's out of eyesight, there's those that have gone before him saying, here he comes. Loving hands were here to greet him on this experience, and loving hands are there to greet him in the next. For this, we're so very grateful. And knowing Scott, that I've seen those pictures, I know he would want to make sure that the memories we keep of him are not of the sickness, are not of any pain. So I'd like you to clear your mind, if you would, and imagine your mind as a gallery filled with walls. And on those walls, I want you to place the pictures of the times that you had together with him, alone or with family, with friends, in a support group, at work. Just allow yourself to see those images of him being his perfect self. Focus on those images. We know that's what he'd want us to do. Allow yourself to release any of the other images that you may have conjured up or may remember that have caused any pain, but only allow those to stay on the walls, are those that bring you comfort and peace and gratitude and joy. Beloved presence, we just bless Scott on his journey. We know that you have always been, and will continue to be surrounding him in your light and in your love. We ask that peace move into the minds of each one of those here today, especially of his parents and his children, that they may immerse themselves in your love and know that the presence of God is with him and with them. We give great thanks for this beautiful life that was expressed here on this earthly plane, and we release him now into your presence, knowing that he will always be divinely guided, sustained, and maintained by your infinite love. For this we are so very grateful. Thank you, beloved presence, for caring for this man, for creating this human who touched so many lives, who gave birth to spirits and souls that will live on forever and share his legacy. For this, again, we're so very grateful. As we seal this in truth, we do so by saying amen together. Amen. And someone is joyously proclaiming him right here. Thank you. The family would like to thank you for attending today. The service has ended. Thank you so much for being here.